Right, yes, thank you. I'm Rob Curry, as you said, Head of Insight and Organisational Performance at the Head of Insight and Organisational Performance at the National Trust. And I'm going to share with you today two examples of how we're using data and insight to think about future, looking to the future around climate change. The first one that you'll see will be Keith Jones, who's our National Specialist at Climate Change. And he will tell you about the work we're doing on climate adaptation and how we use data to use that together with different things. And now I'm going to hope this is going to work. I've been told it'll just go automatically, so let's see. Oh, it's going the wrong way.
There you go.
Good evening. I'm Keith Jones. I'm the National Specialist on Climate Change for the National Trust. And my role is to navigate through all of this uncertainty that climate change poses. This all starts from the challenge that the trustees of the National Trust set the organisation for it to make climate-informed decisions and investments, which is very, very complicated. And therefore we've developed a process based on data and lived experience in order to navigate this uncertainty. I'm about to share with you a slide deck on it. So the picture that you see is pertinent to where you're in Ireland, which is the Giant's Causeway, and that image on the right is the increasing levels of landslides on the main access road to the site. So how does the property and the organisation deal with this increasing risk, but also the uncertainty of how bad and how extreme it'll get? When do you take a decision, and what decision do you take? So our memories are very, very short term. We can just about remember the last two extreme weather events. So the bit on this slide on the left hand side is what 2022 looked like in terms of extreme weather. But we shouldn't wholly focus on the extreme end of climate change. The whole baseline is lifting. The temperature is slowly getting warmer. The seasons are extending and merging into each other. Therefore, the past uncertainties are no longer uncertain. I'm speaking to you today on Friday. This property I'm in Northwest Wales is just about to close tomorrow because of extreme winds on it, and we're in the Easter 2 weeks as well. So this is the reality of where we are, where we're heading to. This is the uncertainty, and the process I'm about to share with you captures how we plan for the uncertainty in the future. So the National Trust has developed something called the RACE approach. So this is the whole approach on climate change and how we blend carbon emissions, land capture from carbon, adaptation, and how we share and engage with others. So the bit I'm responsible, or the technical specialist on, is the adaptation approach. Carbon is relatively more simple because you can count or you can understand your effect. Adaptation is more human-based because it's based on values and subjectivity. So we've developed something called the adaptation handrail, as in, we start from data, you then understand the impacts on what this data means to a place, and then the pathway planning is what options are open to you and when you take the decision on the thing that is affected. The threshold and triggers are the when question, but we need evidence to trigger this and the evaluation of that approach. But this entire approach has been designed to hardwire into the day job, into the thing that the organisation normally does. I've been in the Trust quite a few decades, and when you think of a new initiative and a new thing, you can feel people's energy dissipate because it's a new thing. What we're trying to do is integrate this adaptation thinking or climate-informed decision-making into the day job. So, for example, if you take a project, a footpath or a new visitor centre or a coastal area, the simple question is, does weather have an effect on it, and therefore the weather will change, because climate is simply weather over time, and therefore we're enabling the team to take climate-informed decisions in order to deliver what the trustees ask for. And quite often the staff on the ground are hungry for this support and guidance. So here's a really nice example. This is Rosie Fowles, who's now the ex-head gardener of Ham House, who's struggling with box blight in her garden. And she wants the support and the system to support in her decision making, because she knew what to do, but she wasn't sure of when to do it. And so the system that we've developed supports climate informed decision making. And so we've got the professionals front and centre of our process, but the process is there to support them in the decision making. So it all starts from the data, but the data is usually collected for a different purpose, for our own needs. So what we've done is what we used to say is we've stolen from the best or learned from the best, and so we've just adapted the existing research, sort of recoloured it in and rescaled it so that it can use them all together. So we've made quite a lot of this data publicly available, so there's a link in the bottom right hand corner, but I'll share with others. But we've worked with a lot of organisations on corralling this information and this data. This is the climate hazard data, but to be completely clear with you, climate hazard data doesn't mean impact. So if the temperature increases or the rainfall goes more extreme, as in drier or wetter, what does it mean to a site? So we've developed a workshop process to support the decision making and apply this data to place. So here's a really nice example of change. This is Cornwall, and this is the drought conditions. This is using the Centre for Ecology Hydrology's SPAY index, which is the drought index. And so as you see in Cornwall, it's going to get a lot drier, which means that it will affect plant species.
Well, I'm sure I'm not so good at following Keith's Dorset Welsh tones, but the second thing we're going to talk about is some work that we did with Exeter University to look at what we think the impact might be of climate change to 2080 on our visitor numbers. So we commissioned this with the support. Can I use this one here?
Yeah.
This one might be easier. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah, that'd be easier. We commissioned some work with the support of the UK Climate Resilience Programme and their embedded research programme, and Professor Tim Coles from the University of Exeter Business School undertook the work with us from steering from us the data that we could provide them with. And it was a partnership also with Historic Environment Scotland, where what we did was take a look at our historic visitor numbers and see what correlation they have with weather and climate, and use that as a guide to whether we could see what that might do to visitors going forward if we then plug in climate scenarios to 2080. It's probably one of the largest secondary data studies that looks at the impact of weather on visitation, particularly across multiple sites. It's often done at an individual site level. So this just sets out what we actually did. So it started with getting that historic data, daily data, for 3 years pre-COVID, because if we would have gone past COVID, it's very volatile with external impacts, and we would have had to try and factor that in. And then we, with the help of the Met Office, who supported the project, got historical weather data across a number of different metrics. And then we used something called the Holiday Comfort Index, which is a recognised thing used in tourism research to categorise days into the comfort for visiting. And it has 8 categories from dangerous to ideal. You'll be pleased to see, it's a global measure, you'll be pleased to see in our data we didn't have any dangerous days in those 3 years. But what you can see here is the split between the days for the NT properties, the days for the HES properties. The obvious thing you can see there is we get a slightly better average in terms of the better comfort days than the Scottish properties, which is not surprising given the weather conditions that you'd see in Scotland compared to England. And Wales and Northern Ireland. So that was our first thing, to categorise days, to sort of understand and try and see if we could see then the relationship with the visitor numbers. So if we could see that relationship, then we then bring in the future weather conditions, taking the UK CP 2018 data and using the what's called RCP 8.5 scenario. That's a business as usual scenario, so quite high emissions. And then, as recommended by the Met Office, we used 3 different models within that scenario to see we get a range of impacts. We used that to project the different day types, and then projected that to the visitor numbers. So, this is the results of the historical work, and quite fortunately, we would have been in trouble if this didn't happen. We saw a strong relationship between the more comfortable days, seeing higher visitor numbers, and we also looked at commercial spend at the properties as well, and you see that same similar relationship. But you do see differences. So you'll see, for example, that our members are less strongly correlated when they visit to our payers, and that might be because you're making a bigger trade-off if you're paying to enter a property. The second thing that we saw a difference was properties varied quite significantly in terms of the strength of their relationship with the climate and weather. That's something I'm really keen that we dig into more to understand what characteristics drive that. There are obviously some hypotheses you could have. We also saw seasonally the relationship with weather was much stronger in the autumn and the spring than it is in the summer and the winter. So that's an interesting sort of, I think that's partly Christmas. We were doing this in our what we call our pay barrier properties. So that's a combination, they all generally have a combination of indoor and outdoor. Our winter visitor numbers are often driven by Christmas programming that's less susceptible to the weather. So that might be an explanation for that. You even see some differences between day of the week. If you look at how then go to the future, how the comfort days change over time with the climate scenarios, you can see that conditions improve for visiting. You get more of the good comfort days, and the poorer comfort days start to reduce. It's a lot more lumpy in Scotland, and I think that's partly because the regional variation in weather conditions across Scotland is much more variable than it is in England, so those scenarios play out slightly differently. And this graph here shows the trend of comfort day, the average comfort days for those 3 climate scenarios for the Scottish properties and then for the Trust properties, and you can see they all trend upwards in terms of the average comfort improving over time to the 2070s. And a bigger improvement in the Scottish properties between the 2070s and the 2020s compared to the Trust properties. So what does that mean in terms of then we try and project what that means for our visitor numbers? So what you'll see here is a sort of estimate that by 2070s, now you have to remember this is taking nothing else happening. You know, we might see changes in preferences. We might be doing things to develop places. So this is just the weather impact. We might expect a 9 to 14% increase in visits between 2080 and the baseline that we had, and a bigger increase in Scottish properties. So, as Tim says, all that glitters is not gold. One of my concerns about this research is it looks like, well, climate change could be lifting visitor numbers. I think there's one thing to say about that. One thing is visitor demand, in a sense, not the actual visitors we might be able to accommodate, and there may be reasons why climate change has an impact on that. We have to consider the carrying capacity of our places. And I think you'll have seen in March this year, for example, we've had a lot of wet weather, and that can flood car parks, make trails flooded, and then that makes it difficult for us to accommodate the visitor demand when it's then a dry period. We have to think about the quality of the visitor experience. We might sort of need to put in better facilities for shade, for example. We might see overcrowding if we get too busy on days. if car parks are not what our visitors expect, they'll not sort of think that's positively. We also have to think about safety, and we've not looked at all in this at the cost of doing business. There's lots of costs that climate change can bring, more flooding, more infrastructure investment that you need to do. You can see a picture of one of our car parks here where we've had a period of dry weather followed by a thunderstorm, and it's completely sort of ruined the tracking that we've got there. The other thing we did see is the more extreme storm weather, you do see a reduction in visits, but what you didn't get in the data period we used was those really high temperatures that we've seen in 22 and 23. And although we've done a lot less robust sort of analysis of that, we think there's probably some threshold effect starting to happen around 30 degrees in those days, where we see quite a significant drop-off of visitor numbers. So I think as we, if we were to extend our model to those years, we might see more of a kind of threshold effect that we would see. So all the research is accessible through the University of Exeter's open research site, so if you want to see more, you can get the full report. You can also get to the more detailed data reports, and also I know Tim is very, very happy to field questions if people have them, if you get in touch with him. Thank you.
Thank you so much.